Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. My name is Celeste, the therapist from Boston. And if this is your first time being here, thank you for giving me a try. I appreciate you. What I get to do is talk to people that are doing things to empower others by sharing their story. But once a month, Jermaine Morris and I come on and we talk about ways to get your mind right. I'm going to have Jermaine introduce himself to you all and let you know what he does in his words.
Hi, yes, I'm Jermaine Morris. I'm a certified coach and consultant with a practice based around a DISC assessment, which is basically a test that shows how we interact with people, how we approach problem solving, how we follow procedures and rules. It shows how we are naturally when everything is fine, and then even how we are and are adaptive when we're maybe stressed or under pressure, or we're aware that other people are aware of us. All of the tests comes with a pretty detailed report, which also shows our most and least effective ways to communicate with us, potential blind spots in behavior, all of that stuff. So all that can be found at mykeystome.com. This website, you can get all the information and check it out if you're interested.
Right. And if people like wanted to do a consultation, if they're not really sure, but it sounds interesting, what's the process for that for them?
Yeah. So you go to the website, My Keys to Me, MYKEYSTOME, My Keys to Me. And there's more information on the assessment itself, coaching programs, get you a 15-minute consultation to give you all the necessary information, and then go ahead and get you started.
Oh, okay. So they can book a 15-minute consultation. That's good
All
for
that
them
stuff
to
right
know.
there on the website.
Okay, good. And then speaking of awareness, we're in a new year, 2023. I always say there's something about the new year that brings on this new energy for self-development, which is dope. I just, I wish we had that like all year round, but we don't. But, I think it's good that people are in this mindset. But one of the ways that you really like work on helping people develop their skill set is through self-awareness, which can be extremely hard. Before we kind of go into like your kind of theme for the year, explain to people what self-awareness means for people that might be new to hearing that idea of being self-aware.
Okay. So the first thing I always work under the premise is self-awareness without judgment. So being aware of how we are, how we interact with people, being aware of, you know, our communication styles, being aware of our history and
Mhm.
our tendencies, our biases, our and looking at it through the lens of strictly as is. So not right,
Mhm.
wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't, none of that language. Just simply what is. What do I have
Mhm.
tendencies to do? What am I more likely than not? How would I respond? Just how am I? And
Mhm.
so being self-aware means if you choose to do anything about it or not, that's a separate conversation, but at least know
Yeah.
what you're working with. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that's my focus. So if you're trying to approach business, trying to approach, your finances, your family dynamic, relationships, whatever, just a good base point of what is it I'm working with. I always preface like,
Mhm.
what are the ingredients on the side of the box?
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
not going to have a judgment on their health level or nutritional
Yeah.
value or anything. Just what are the list of ingredients? What is it that
Mhm.
makes me me? And then how do I use that when I operate in the world?
Yeah, I like it. And you mentioned finances, family, relationships, business, whatever. I think with all parts of life, where we're dealing with these different dynamics, being self-aware just takes you to another level. One of the hard parts of not being self-aware, and if we're not conscious of like what's happening, I think we can find ourselves placing blame on other people or other things and find ourselves not feeling in control of our life, which, when I think about it, that has to be hard to be like going through life feeling like there's no control. Tell people a little bit about like kind of like your yearly theme. That's something that you do kind of every year. You kind of think about something to focus on. What's your focus for the year?
Yeah, every year I pick a particular direction, and even it doesn't mean that when the year is up, we abandon the previous year's
Right,
philosophy.
right,
It's
right.
just more so just maybe adding chapters to a book. And
Mhm.
so for this year, the focus is more like centralizing with self awareness. So as opposed to seeing the world through the lens of what they, them, he, she, so and so, such and such, the world, the universe, like all these things that they're doing, let me get myself centered with where I am, with what I want, with what I need, with what I'm doing, with where I'm going. And because with that lack of self-awareness, the world comes at us really quickly. Like when
Mhm.
we're not aware of where we are, it just seems like everything just keeps flying out of nowhere. It's almost like when you're driving and you don't pay attention.
Mhm.
Everybody else on the road saw that car that was getting ready to pull out in front of you.
Yeah.
Everybody saw it for 30 yards. You weren't paying attention, and to you, it came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody else was aware that it was there. They were wondering why you kept going, but
Mhm. Mhm.
but when we're not paying attention, life just keeps coming at us super fast. So when we can get centered in our and being aware of our surroundings and aware of how we are, it does kind of slow life down a little bit, and it gives us a better
Yeah.
footing to approach it.
Yeah, that's good. And for context for people that sometimes, I know we talk about self-awareness a lot and I think it's always going to be necessary. I think people don't understand. People may say like, "Oh, wow, that's me," and I don't think they realize a lot of the reasons why we have tend to just kind of like go through life and go through the motions. A lot of times out of survival, right? If we were not taught how to like pause and process and make connections, like how would you know how to make connections, right? This is where the like self-awareness without judgment comes into play. So as you become aware of some of the things that you may have been doing that no longer serves you, it's really important to understand that you can't know what you don't know. And I think that if, like, I'll say, if it's somebody important in your life, a kid or a niece or something, I'll say if your niece came up to you and beat themselves up for something they didn't know, like, would you say yes, keep beating yourself up? And 20 times out of 20 people will say no, I would never do that. And it's like, well, why do we do that to ourselves? Like, we can be so self-critical when we realize some of the ways that we've been operating, and unfortunately that being self-critical, sometimes we just continue to repeat the behavior because we're beating ourselves up so bad.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're in that survival mindset, that to me is where that's a factor when I look at the difference between 10-foot vision versus 10,000-foot vision. And
Explain that.
so, yeah, the 10 feet vision is literally just how it sounds. I can see 10 feet directly in front of me.
Mhm.
10,000 feet vision is when you can see like the skyline of your city. Like you can
Mhm.
see like the big picture. So
Mhm.
when you're in survival mode, it's 10 feet in front of you. You'll
Mhm.
even find yourself making statements like, I can't even think about that. I got to deal with this right now. I can't even worry
Yeah.
about that today. I can't even
Yeah.
focus on that. I have to literally live my life 10 feet at a time.
Mhm.
And that, like I said, that's when life just keeps coming at you because all you can see is your focus is 10 feet. And when it
Mhm.
comes to self-awareness is recognizing, is that the case? I
Mhm.
may have been a child or younger or in a different situation where I needed to be watching every corner. I needed to be watching every 10 feet. Is that still the same situation? Can I pick my eyes up and look a little bit further? Can I
Mhm.
change my perspective a little bit? Am I still I may feel like I'm still in survival mode, but am I still
Yeah.
in a survival situation?
Yeah.
And so asking ourselves those questions and getting that perspective, that's a part of the self-awareness. I'm still
Yeah.
living like it's 2015, though I don't live a 2015 life.
Yeah, and for people, the reason why that happens is because the mind doesn't have concept of time. And so
Yeah.
when you're hit with those same emotions, whether it's like feeling overwhelmed or, whatever those emotions are that may have been similar to something that happened in 2015, your mind automatically goes into this heightened state. And so you're like on heightened alert. And a lot of times we're unfortunately walking around with our shoulders up, we're tense, we're barely breathing. And it's not because we're in danger in the moment, it's
Yeah.
because our system is preparing us for something that may not need to be prepared for. And the important thing to remember, which I always want to stress, is that we were not meant to live life in the way that we live life, and we are literally breaking our bodies down by the way that we're operating. But our mind and body is doing what it's designed to do unless we interrupt that cycle. And it's
Yes.
really hard to interrupt that cycle without the self-awareness that you are talking about, right? Like where you start to center it, where you take ownership and it's not they or them. That's because if it's they or them, then I'm waiting for Jermaine to do something different before I'm okay.
Yeah.
Right. Like if I'm blaming you for how I'm feeling or what's happening in my life, and you could have done something, but I need to learn what can I do different or how do I move forward
Yeah.
instead? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And that being stuck, kind of like those people who grew up with food insecurities.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
grew up as a child, and you and your siblings, and food was tight, and you wasn't 100% sure where your next meal was coming from. Then
Mhm.
you're 35 and you still find yourself hoarding food
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
or you grew up and money was tight when you were kids. So now you're beyond financially secure, but you're
Yeah.
still your relationship with money is the same as when it was when you didn't
Mhm.
know when the next dollar was going to come.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so sometimes reaching that place of, okay, those are my old circumstances,
Mhm.
these are my new ones. And when it
Mhm.
pertains to taking the ownership and the centralizing ourselves with basing our world around us. That
Mhm.
may seem self-centered to some, but like I said, like the world revolving around us, where it's like, this is me. I take control what you can control. You know,
Yeah.
I have zero control over how this person speaks, but I have 100% control over how I choose to respond with it, and if I want to continue to have this person in my space or
Yeah.
continue to interact with this individual, and to what capacity I'll do so.
Mhm.
To make that shift out of the survival mode, or where we're just looking at 10 feet in front of us, it starts with saying, okay, I'm not going to just live life on the defensive.
Mhm. That's
I'm going,
hard to do.
yeah, and when you're kind of like those boxers who were in the ring and they're just getting hit, and the
Yeah.
corner's yelling, you got to punch back. And every thought they're thinking, the second I drop my hand to punch back, I'm going to get knocked out. So
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
just stand with our hands in front of our face in the corner, and we just kind of take whatever life gives. But it's true that the only way to get out of this is you're going to have to shift this to the offensive. And
Mhm.
the offensive starts with the I.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
when it's, I'm deciding how I want to approach life, I'm
Mhm.
deciding how I want to react, I'm deciding the directions I want to go in. And
Mhm.
with the self-awareness, it starts with, first off, how have I been previously doing this?
Mhm. Mhm.
So becoming aware of the previous and current patterns. So
Mhm.
instead of just trying to interject something brand new in this whole brand new, well, let me at least learn how I've been doing it.
Mhm.
Like, how have I been
Yeah.
approaching relationships? How have I been dealing with money? How
Mhm.
have I been on the job? How have I
Mhm.
been in the family dynamic? Like, I'm keep thinking that it's them. I had all these horrible bosses. Well, actually, I was a
Mhm.
bad employee. You
Mhm.
know, like, how have I been? Previously.
And for some people, I tell people what I realize is like some people were victims growing up, right? And of their circumstances, didn't have control. It was really out of their control. And unfortunately, people have not changed that perspective, right? Like after 18, it's like we have choices. Some have harder cards dealt than others,
Yes.
right? And again, fault and responsibility, two different things. And so for people that may find themselves in that mindset of what Jermaine is talking about, where they're realizing like it does seem like it's everyone else, understand that maybe in your life that was the case. And maybe you didn't. And that's why a lot of times it's hard to center it as I, because at the beginning of life growing up, you didn't have that choice. It wasn't given to you.
Yeah.
And now like educating yourself on a new perspective is important. But it's not as simple as this podcast is,
Yeah.
it's a really hard thing to do because you're working with 30, 40, 20, whatever years of unprogramming. So sometimes people describe this journey of healing as a battle, and it really is an internal battle that takes place because your system is so used to like pleasing others or blaming others, and so to do the opposite, it can really feel extremely hard. So I just really want to say that part.
Oh no, that's very, very real and very important,
Yeah.
because up until you're quote unquote an adult, till
Yeah.
when technically legally we look at 18, but some people have been responsible for themselves sooner than that.
Sure.
So everything that you do it's at the hand of someone else. So
Yeah.
you're not given, autonomy of your life and your decisions and your choices. So you were literally living in a space of, I have to do what they tell me, or I have to
Exactly.
accept or deal with what's brought to me.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and everybody unlocks the doors, opens the windows, and takes the reins off.
Hmm.
And if you, in that process, weren't taught, it wasn't a gradual transition of preparing you for making your own choices and dealing with your own consequences and all that, you're just kind of in the world. And the default is the food in front of me is bad because my entire life somebody served me bad food. So my
Mm-hmm.
default thought process is, if there's bad food in front of me, somebody gave me bad food. Then all of a sudden you wake up and from Sunday to Monday, you're now responsible for all the food in front of you.
Hmm.
So it's like, oh, well, this food is bad. Your brain is saying somebody gave you bad food. Life is now telling you, no, you gave you bad food.
Yeah.
And so you have to go against, they said, your all these years of however,
Yep.
decades or of the process of thinking that way. And it is not just, it's just though life changes in a night,
Yeah.
we
Yep.
don't change in a night.
For real.
Yeah.
And we also have to understand we live in a culture and a society that does not talk about things that in a way that allows us to own our power.
Yeah.
Right. The goal in our society is to sell us things, is to market, is to make us feel insecure. So you won't really find mainstream media or the mainstream talking about ways in which you can empower yourself, like right now, like using what you have, right? It's like nice, pretty, like fancy things that is marketed to us that may be out of our reach financially or literally, where we don't have the time. But one of the things that Jermaine does well is he likes to help people like in the moment. So as we're discussing this idea of like becoming more self-aware, what would, if somebody's listening and they're thinking like, you know what, that's my issue. I do feel like life is coming at me because, and when you get ready to work on healing, it's not like life pauses, right?
No,
Which is unfortunate.
that life still be
So
life.
it still be lifing. So, what would you say to somebody that's thinking about their life and it's really hitting them in this moment? Because I never want people to think healing is out of reach due to their socioeconomic status or where they've come from or where they are. Like my goal is to really help people empower themselves, like in the moment as they're listening to this and thinking about things that they can do.
Yeah. So some simple things to start with is pen and paper.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And to the best of your ability, say writing out where you are currently, you know, uh, financially, your family dynamic, your social circle.
And you
Um,
can use a wellness wheel. If you Google
yeah,
wellness wheel, it has the different categories of life. Like if you wanted like a visual of what Jermaine is talking about as far as the categories, you can utilize that to start the process.
yes, a lot of great tools to get. And just if you can, you give an honest account of where you are. Like we're not,
Mhm,
like I said, not no judgment.
mhm.
Just what's my life looking like? And then you can, then I kind of, the way I look at it is, where do I want to be based upon where I am?
Yeah.
So if some people use vision boards, so for visuals, something like, okay, is the money I'm making now in alignment with the money I want to make? Is my
Mhm,
relationship situation in alignment with the way that I want it to be? Family, and you just kind of look at it, and then going back the other side, where did I come from? So what was my family dynamic like where I came from?
mhm,
Previous relationships that I've had. How did I grow up? My thoughts about money, and how have I previously
mhm.
used money? Like, just sometimes when it's just like, let me just kind of put this on paper in front of me so I can
Mhm.
see where I've been, where I'm at, and where I want to go. So I may not
Mhm.
even know how I'm going to get to where I'm going,
Right.
but at least let me be able to map this out in
Yeah.
front of me.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when we can look at it, this is just one example of seeing where we were to where we are to where we want to go. that kind of does a little something to the brain, and everything
Mhm.
is not 10 feet. Now, you may not get to
Yeah.
10,000 with that vision. It may go from 10 to 25.
Right. Right.
It may go
Right.
from 10 to 50, but I have a map, a little bit of where I've been, where I'm at, where I'm going. I'm not just
Mhm.
staring at the 10 feet in front of me. It gives a
Mhm.
little breathing room.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just that's kind of one tool to just kind of like, okay, just okay. It's just the world's not coming at me as fast.
Right, right. And the pen to paper, what Jermaine is talking about, like trying to get this stuff out of your mind, because right now your mind is full of like doubt, full of like what they said, all the things that have happened. So it can be really distorted, right?
Yes.
When I talk to people and pull things out, it's like, look, it's inside of you, but like you just aren't asking yourself questions. I say the more we question what's happening, how am I feeling, like really just really diving deep into like us and what's going on with us, the answers start to come. They won't come if you don't start, and they won't come in just one set sitting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the more that we ask these questions, the more we sit and we process what we want, where we're trying to go, how we're going to get there. I do find that the universe does start to speak to us. And the example I use a lot is if there's like if I have a new red Toyota, I'll start seeing more red Toyotas, not because everybody decided to copy me, but because my brain is looking at that Toyota. So if I'm thinking about what I want my life to be like, if I'm planning it out, if I'm processing it, then I'm going to start to see answers that's going to help me get to where I'm going to go. But if
Yes.
I'm not processing that, if I think life is happening to me, if I think Jermaine keeps bothering me and everybody's bothering me, my brain is going to look for evidence that continues to confirm that things are happening to me and I have no control. Does that make sense?
Very much so. And it ties directly into what you said earlier about how the brain does not have the concept of time.
Right, right, right.
So
Yeah.
while we keep everything just in our head, it's not, there's no differentiation between 10 years ago, 6 years ago, 2 weeks ago. So when we're trying to figure out where we've been, what we're doing, and where we want to go, that's why you
Mhm,
can think of you can be 37 and
mhm.
think of a memory, and all of a sudden your eyes start tearing up and you
Yep,
start getting sad over something that happened when you were 8.
yep,
Like,
yep,
because the brain is reliving it in real time.
yep, yep.
So when you can put it out in front of you on paper and take it
Yeah,
out of the space of the emotions and
doesn't
the
have that
feelings and the
power.
thoughts, then
Mhm,
it's just on paper.
mhm.
And then it turns more into a math problem.
Yeah.
Then it turns more into the analytical side of the brain of mapping out, you
Mhm.
know, what was, what is, and what may be.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it gives the brain a different set of tools. It's been using the hammer in your brain, but it used the
yeah,
screwdriver on the paper. It just gives it
yeah,
a new set of tools to process literally the same information, but it's
yeah,
using it in a different way.
yeah.
So that's it's very important to get, you hear people all the time, get out of your own head.
Mhm,
That's a really, pen and paper, in my experience, I found is a really good way to get it out of our head,
mhm,
to get it out of that space where where time, doesn't exist, into a place where on our paper we can see a linear line and we
mhm.
can kind of compartmentalize it a little easier.
Yeah, and something as simple as a paper and a pen that you can get from the dollar store that you
Yeah.
probably have right next to you. The idea of that sounds simple, but the act of it is actually hard. And
Yes.
so, as we're talking about these different things that you have to do, one of the key words that I like to use is the intentional process of it. And I say, we survive well. So if I'm running late for work and I'm not showing up for my clients, they're going to eventually drop off. I'm going to stop getting paid. So I'm going to set my alarm to get to work, right? And I think I know when it comes to living life, right? When we're trying to live and we've been in survival mode, unfortunately, we're not thinking about intentional. We'll hear this podcast, or we'll go to a conference, get these really cool books. We'll be in the moment and feel so motivated. But then we go home, the books collect dust. You wait till my next podcast next week and nothing happens, nothing
Yeah.
changes. And so whether it's this podcast or something else you listen to, I really want you to think about like, how can I be intentional about taking this information that because it's not just this information. Every time I speak to people, I look at it as I'm part of their watering blooming process. I don't look at it as like I'm going to allow them to bloom, right? There are times I speak to people and they'll say, like 6 months later, I finally get what you were saying, right? I was listening to this thing or I was reading this book, right? Pieces start to come together
Yeah.
if you start to engage in the process. That self-awareness. And when you start to engage in the process, you'll actually find yourself finding the answers that you need. And I think people get frustrated because it doesn't feel like it's coming at the speed that they want it to come at.
Yes.
And so you got to really have patience and grace with yourself as you're doing this process, because you're unlearning years and years of programming.
Yes, because that's what goes into, I would say, like the brain only looks for the answers to the questions that we ask it. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we're not on the intentional part, if we're
Mm-hmm.
not like, okay, well, it's compound, it's
Mm-hmm.
not light switch. So some of us are looking for, oh, I heard this one piece of information, this one piece of data, and it flipped a light switch and changed my whole life around. No,
Right.
it's compound. It's
Yeah.
this book plus that conference plus
Yeah.
this conversation plus this experience plus this intentionality plus this consistency plus
Yeah.
like it's compounded. And then that's when
Mm-hmm.
we start. The brain is now like, oh, okay, like there's all these,
Mm-hmm.
like I always looking at when you reference the car, when you try new food, all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden you try Thai food for the first time. And now all of a sudden you find out that there's 6 Thai restaurants 10 miles from your house.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, when they open that up? It's like 10 years ago. Like it's always been there, but your brain never had a reason to look for Thai restaurants
Right.
before.
Right.
Yeah. And so when we start try to use this stuff, like I said, centralizing ourselves in self-awareness of starting with, okay, I'm making a conscious effort because I want my life to be different than it has previously been.
Right.
Like
And
I
I feel like
want to.
people want that.
What's that?
I feel like people want that. Like I hear people say they want that, but I don't think they're doing the thing that needs to get done to make it happen.
Yes. So there are some people who believe that life is like, what was it? Cinderella. That someone's going to knock on their door and put on their foot the perfect life that fits. Like, I'm going to be mopping the floor one day, sweeping the chimney. I'm just going to be doing
A
something.
lot of young people, unfortunately, feel that way.
And someone's going to knock on the door with the perfect life for me. And they're going to slip this glass slipper on, and magically my whole world is going to change. Like, if that's the belief system, once again, you've removed the I. You're waiting for someone to knock on your door to bring you this life that you feel is waiting for you. As opposed to, I'm going to proactively try to create the life that it is that I want. And it's not like with old phrase, all roads lead to Rome. They don't in this situation. So you have to get on the road to Rome if that's where that's your desired outcome. You can't just stay on a random path and think that you're going to end up,
Right.
in this perfect existence. It's something you have to be very proactive about.
No, that's good. I love that. And it reminded me of an example of because I worked in nonprofit for years before I went out into private practice full time in 2016. But I remember when somebody that was they owned a pharmacy. I've shared this before, and I had started doing private practice like part time because I was dabbing in it a little bit because all I knew is like working for an agency and sick time and vacation time. And he said, Celeste, when are you going to have your own? And I said, I'm just like waiting for things to like happen. And he said to me, he said, you know what, Celeste, people like you will never have their own because you're waiting for things to be in a nice, neat little package. And that's not how life works.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody that's always been, I take people's words and I listen to them intentionally, and it hit. And I literally went on Craigslist that day to start looking for my own place to practice in, which I did. But it's important to know like life doesn't come in a package.
Yeah.
And I love social media because I've learned how to cook on it. I get really cool ideas on it. But then I think for some people it's done them a disservice because they've allowed it to like warp their view on like how things work.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just all come together. Like Celeste the Therapist podcast didn't just come in a nice, neat little package. My book, like my everything that I've done, even though I went out and started my practice, there was like different, like it didn't go in a straight road. It
Yeah.
wasn't like all roses, right? But then I took those obstacles as they came, and I made sure to like face them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what Jermaine is saying is so important to understand about life and about like as you're trying to heal, right? I think I, I know once we accept that we, this is happening, you're in the process of healing. That's the start, right? It's not a nice little bow, or it's like I'm healing. And I think if we think about it that way, it'll help us, so we're not waiting for this magical thing to happen.
Yeah. I always look at self-worth with nursery rhymes today, these analogies. So I always look at like the path of self-awareness is like the story of the three little pigs. So
Okay.
so imagine I think I told the story. I don't know if I told it here.
I don't
So
think I heard it.
so imagine if you have a big box, a big crate, and at the bottom of the crate are bricks, in the middle of the crate is wood, and at the top of the crate is straw. So most of us, we kind of look at the surface things that we can do. We look at the kind of face value stuff we have. That's the top level, that's the straw. And we decide that that's what we want to build our house with. That's what we want to try to build our shelter to kind of help us defend us from life, to kind of deal with the elements a little bit. That's what we figure we can build our house with. And then when we kind of dig deeper in the box and we dig deeper into ourselves and learn ourselves more, after you get past the straw, you find out that there's wood down there. Oh, I can build a more sturdy house. I can build a more structural frame. I can build a more foundational, structure that I can live in and thrive with. And then the more we keep digging in and learning about ourselves, oh, there's brick down here. And it's like, oh, I can build me a whole, brick mansion, a whole that can deal with tornadoes, that can deal with flood, that can deal with all this craziness that this world and this life has. And it all took I just had to keep going deeper into me. And so a lot of us get hung up on the straw, or we think we're doing something with the wood, and we're looking everywhere else for materials. We're grabbing plastic that we find, we're grabbing glass that we can find in the world. But if we just, the more self-aware and the more introspective, that's where the real materials are. And the more that we do that is the stronger of the structure that we can build for ourselves and how we want to live.
I like, you never shared that before, because I would have remembered that.
Okay.
That was dope. And I always, because I have a hard time when people will say like, "Oh, I wish I could be like you, the way you just flow." And I said, everybody has that ability. And only reason why it seems easy, because you don't see the grunt and grind work that goes on behind the scenes of what I do. But we all have it within us to be
Yes.
guided, but it takes work, and it's the work that nobody sees. It's the work that you're doing in the wee hours. And I really want that example that you use. It's like, if we keep digging deep, the answers are going to be there.
Yeah.
And so like,
It's
I don't
not a
think there's
shallow
wrong with
box.
that. It's not a shallow
That box
box.
that has
No.
it's not a shallow box. Like, you really got
Yeah,
to get in there. The
you
only stuff that's at
do.
the top is that straw stuff. And
Yeah,
that's flimsy and it's not sustainable. And that's why we find ourselves, our house keeps getting blown over and it feels like we have to keep starting over,
yeah, yeah,
But when you get a little bit deeper, it's a long claw. It's crawl. Imagine get to the bottom and you're throwing wood out of the box to the top. It's a process.
yeah.
But and then the bricks are the heaviest and they're at the bottom, and there's a
Mhm,
lot of introspection and a lot of work that goes with that. But on the other side of that
mhm,
is you are so much stronger and more
mhm.
fortified and more able and equipped just from doing that process.
Yeah, there's a lot of grieving, right, of shedding the old self and just walking into your purpose. Denzel Washington, he was giving a speech, and he said if it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah.
And so it's not. And I think just sometimes when we look at people talk about the process, just do this and just do that, they make it sound so simple. They don't talk about the fact that it's hard.
Yeah.
They don't talk about the fact that it's not a straight road. They don't talk about the fact that it takes time. It takes you giving yourself grace. And so I really like, that's always going to be my message on this podcast when I'm talking to people, is that like, yes, like you can do it, but also, yes, it's hard. And I think once we understand the process, the same way if a doctor says, like, the physical therapy is going to be hard, but eventually you'll be able to use your legs again.
Yeah.
More likely than not, people are going to go through the physical therapy because they want access to their legs again. But it's very external, is so you can see it in real time and they can see the progress. And I think we get discouraged when we're going through that internal process because we can't see it in real time if we're not really paying attention. We start to pay attention, we could start to see the ways that we are growing.
Yeah.
And I know, unfortunately, everybody can afford a therapist or a coach or somebody, an accountability partner, right? Like that would be ideal. But hey, if I don't have access to that, let me use what I have. And I
Yeah.
really want people to think about that.
And the part that I think is real that goes along with that process. So say if you're still sticking with the materials, it's a twofold. So number one, you have to say, you built a straw house. The grieving process of tearing down your straw
Yeah.
house to
Yeah.
build a wood one. So all the
Yeah.
memories you had in the straw house, all the stuff that you thought that this
Mm-hmm.
straw house is going to bring you, you're tearing that down to build a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And then the negotiation with yourself of, do I want to do that?
Yeah.
Like, I got a straw house, I keep the wind off of me. I got a wood house, the rain doesn't hit me. Do I really want to go through the process of tearing down this house while I build the brick one?
Mm-hmm.
They're like with your physical therapy reference, there are that percentage of people that just concede to the chair.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just like, yeah, at the end of the road, I'll be able to do this, but
It's
you
too
don't
much
know.
work.
You're in there and you keep falling down and you're in pain and you're aching. And there is a process of where you'll ask yourself, is it worth it? You'll concede to the straw house.
Yeah.
Or you'll concede to the wooden one. And you're like, this is kind of good enough. So when it comes to that process of, because I think that's a real thing to look into, there will be discouraging points, but the goal is the original plan, the life I want.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, all roads don't lead to Rome. Like there's a particular path that's going to have setbacks. It's going to have decisions to make. It's going to have sacrifices. It's going to have to be, negotiation on some things. It's going to have a complete lack of negotiation on things.
Yeah.
And so in that, to get to where we're trying to get to, it is a process that can be painful. But like that day that you stand up, that day that you walk into your brick house, the day that you can shed those things that have been holding you and haunting you and that you've been dealing with, that is Rome. That is what you've been working towards.
I like that. And for people that are, they may know this information and maybe music to their ears and food to their spirit. But if you're somebody that finds yourself like trying to help others, like when you think about this process, understand, because what I find is that sometimes people are trying to get people to get to the brick and fighting harder than that person. Just be mindful of the energy that you're using, because when it comes to healing, when it comes to awareness, like it's really an inside job.
Yes.
The support is great, but then don't burn yourself out. And then I have people in my life, family, friends that like choose a route to keep the straw house, and so like I walk past the straw house and I say this is their choice, right?
Yes.
And I meet them where they are. I don't try to keep forcing the knowledge of what's in there because it takes them doing the work. And for a long time, I found myself working harder than other people. And so I just want to encourage somebody that may be like me and have been working harder than others to know, like, just like try to accept that this is their acceptance and this is their choice, because everybody's not going to go deep, and that's okay, right? It's not the end of the world.
As long as they're okay with it.
As long as they're okay, that's okay.
Yeah. That the self-awareness without judgment, the other part is awareness without judgment. So when we're not judging ourselves, when we're looking like, okay, this is the decisions I'm making, like, let me just look at what is. If the person next to us decides that a straw house is all I want to live in, then to say, okay, a straw, then there are neighborhoods full of straw houses. Like there's not,
right.
like that, and leave it at that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if you know, I'm not one for the unsolicited help. If somebody's saying I'm good with a straw house, they're good with a straw house. If they're good with a wood
Yeah.
house, they're good with a wood house. If they're
Uh-huh.
satisfied with a brick house, they're satisfied. Like that's their walk.
Yeah.
And we can find ourselves being more problematic trying to
Mm-hmm.
make somebody tear down their straw house because we think they should be in a brick house. You know,
Right.
you should quit this job because I think you should be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
should
Right.
quit
Right.
being single because I think you should be married.
Right.
You
Right.
should stop being childless because I think you should have a family.
Right. Right.
You know, and we try to put those things on other people, and if that's not their walk, that's not their walk.
And I, when this first hit home years ago, when I worked at a shelter and I did outreach in the woods and stuff, and people like knew who I was, and they would be like, "Oh, hey, Celeste," and I would try to get them into housing, and they didn't want housing, and me, who has always been in housing, couldn't understand, like, why wouldn't you want housing? But some people have been outside and for 10, 15, 20 years, and they enjoy the freedom, the lack of having to abide by any rules or even come into the shelter. And then and they were smiling, they were happy, and I said, you know what? Who am I to tell them what's best for them if they enjoy sleeping in the woods, right? Who said they had to get a house? And so I think is what you're saying is so important, because a lot of times there's so much conformity that takes place. And we look at, well, who was the lady? Tracy Ellis. I remember somebody was saying every time they interview her, they always say, like, ask her about kids. It's as if that's the
Yeah.
marker
Diana
for
Ross's daughter. Yeah, Tracy Ellis
Diana
Ross.
Ross. Yeah, like, ask her about kids. And I'm like, why do we ask people, why are you single? Why do we say, when are you having kids, or why
Yeah.
don't you have kids? Like, we have to really be mindful of, like, everybody's not gonna pick the same path, and there's no one right path. Like, it's whatever works for that person. And so really being mindful of that is important.
Yeah, that walk that we're on. So that's kind of with the same points of centralizing with self-awareness. If I have all this energy to dictate to you how your life should be, what's
For
going on
real.
with me?
Yeah.
If every time I walk into a room, I'm starting off with how everybody else should be living, what what is my motivation that I have all this judgment for
Distraction.
everyone else's life choices?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so start being aware of the I have this tendency to always tell my little sister how she should be with her money. I always have to tell my brother how he should be in his relationship. I got to tell my mom what she needs to be doing with her this. I got to tell all my friends how they need to be.
No.
Why?
Yeah.
What's going on with me that I just
Yeah.
feel so compelled that I have to? So centralizing ourselves, the self-awareness without judgment. Like I said, it's not based on, well, who's struggling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's easy to say the one who may be financially having issues, well, they need to make these changes. No, you can be a good job at a big house and marriage and family and still have some things that need to be
Yep.
addressed.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
those societal
Yep.
benchmarks do not remove us from
True.
having lack of self-awareness.
So true.
You
So
can be
true.
very financially successful with zero self-awareness.
So true. This was amazing. I think a lot of people are gonna find themselves, um, whether starting the process or some validation around their process. Because life is a process. I don't ever feel like I've arrived. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm on this, like, journey, and I feel like it's something that is, like, very automatic, and it feels more natural. But initially it didn't feel so natural. And so I just want to encourage people to keep feeding this spirit, whether it's this podcast, whether it's other things that you're doing. There's so many different things that you're doing that's going to keep you in alignment, because we're living in a society that does not want us to be in alignment. They really want us to depend on them in many different ways. And so, like, you have to really be intentional about your process, because if you don't, you'll find yourself feeling insecure, finding you need things that you may not have to start the process. And that's just, you're not being fair to yourself.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. It's world is looking to tell you, if you don't know where to go, this world
We'll
is
tell
very
you.
quick to tell you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you got to be really mindful of the programming that takes place. So tell people again where they can reach you, how they can find you if they want to work with you.
Yes. So mykeystome.com, my keys to me, sure enunciate. And that has all the information on the assessment. It comes with a 22-page report, very detailed information on how we are as individuals. Like I said, at that site, at the website is more information about the assessment. You can set up a 15-minute consultation and go ahead and get you started. And then on all social media platforms, it's at J Morris CEO.